Hello, my name is Freddie Alexander, and I am here today to read Mr. Spice Bag, which is a story about a town addicted to spice bags. And it is all because of this tall gentleman here, Mr. Spice Bag. Chapter 8. George froze. For a moment there was no sound but for the clock on the mantelpiece. It would soon chime midnight. Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick. George's parents and Lucy all sat on the old leather couch opposite the fireplace. Lucy blew bubblegum and stared into her phone. George could tell by the glint in her eyes that she found this all very entertaining. The room stank of spice bags, which appeared to have a calming effect over George's parents. But it was Mr. Spicebag's presence that really placated them. His parents never entertained guests, but here they sat in their Sunday best, his dad in a grey suit, his mum in her peach dress and matching hat. The dusty silver tea set saved for special occasions sat on the coffee table while both his parents beamed from ear to ear. They smiled so hard it looked painful. Tick, tock, tick, tock, tick, tock. Mr. Spicebag smiled at George. George studied Mr. Spicebag. The first thing George inspected were those teeth. Poor, neglected, disgustingly yellow teeth. Teeth that would make the local dentist faint. And this was no ordinary dentist, reader, oh no. This was a former drill sergeant who had been to war, had seen terrible, terrible things, and made George do press-ups any time he needed a filling. Mr. Spicebag's fingers were thin and bony, a bit like twigs from the great copper beech. Those long twigs stirred a cup of milky grey tea, so milky in fact that it was just milk, with a spoon that made a scratching, scraping sound. Mr. Spicebag tapped the side of the cup. Ding, 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 and rested the silver spoon on the saucer. He took a sip and placed it down on a coaster, making George's mum swoon. He rose to his feet, extending up like a wiry lifting crane, higher and higher, taller and taller. George looked up and felt dwarfed, and just as the great crane had risen, a long arm descended. That long twig-like hand, covered in red, blotchy grease burns, extended forward and enveloped George's hand like an envelope. George found Mr. Spicebag's attire intriguing. A worn dark three-piece suit, a white shirt with black buttons, heavy weathered boots and a floppy bow tie. He looked a bit like a funeral undertaker. Mr. Spicebag bent down with a nod and a toothy smile. The firelight illuminated his lined, weathered face. His skin was otherwise pale and covered with a film of sweat. George could see that his scruffy hair was thinning. His age was hard to place. He was definitely older than George's parents. But it was those black marble eyes that struck George most. It was as if they were independent of the rest of his face, for while his mouth smiled and wrinkles followed, his eyes were vacant, hollow. Like Barnaby did to him, George peered into those eyes like a window into the man's soul and saw emptiness. No twinkle of kindness like in Barnaby's eyes, nor the daftness in George Jasper's eyes, not even the glee in Lucy's eyes. Nothing. Well, don't just stand there gulping, snapped his dad through a gritted fake smile. Say hello to Mr. Spicebag. Yeah, hi. I think what you mean to say is, hello, Mr. Spicebag, said his mum. Mr. Spicebag waved away the formalities with his rake-like hands. Not at all, Mrs. George's mum. Please, he is probably exhausted, he said, his voice warm and gentle, unlike his eyes. After all, it is so late. Where have you been all this time, George? When Mr. Spicebag spoke to George's mum, he was charming and chatty, light and breezy. But when he spoke to George, he was intense and sharp. George was unsure how to respond, so decided to look at his feet, the tried and tested invisibility trick that never worked. Mr. Spicebag turned from George and opened his arms to the room, almost like a conductor to an orchestra. George was involved in a little incident at my establishment earlier this evening. Sit, George, he added, and like a well-trained dog, George wedged in beside his mum and dad. Incident? What incident? George's dad glared at his son in his ever-present simmering rage. Mr. Spicebag continued casually, towering from above. Light-heartedly almost, he picked up and inspected ornaments as he slowly paced back and forth. You see, George entered my establishment earlier on the false pretense that I was open. It was partly my fault. The door was unlocked. Now, he must have been looking for a menu on the counter, or a dog, or a toy, or... Quite frankly, I don't know what he was looking for because, well, I am not a 6-year-old boy. Do I look like a 6-year-old boy? I'm 10, corrected George. Shut it, George's dad muttered out the side of his mouth. You most certainly do not look like a 6-year-old boy, Mr. Spicebag, sir. Mr. Spicebag continued speaking in a leisurely way, walking from side to side as if the rug were his stage and George's family his captivated audience. Moving immediately to the point, George saw it fit to break my antique vase, a family heirloom. It's been in the Spicebag family for generations. I got it from my father, and he from his dad. He in turn got it from his old man, and he from his pop, and I'm pretty sure that he stole it from his pappy, and, well, I think you get the idea. It was priceless. His dad glared at George. He rose clumsily to his feet and pulled a checkbook from his pocket. How much do we owe you? George's dad said, dabbing his biro on his tongue. Name your price. Mr. Spicebag considered George's dad. For once, it was his dad's turn to be judged. After a brief moment, he took the pen from George's dad's hand, and wrote a figure on a spare handkerchief. Well, this time it was George's dad's turn to swoon, plonking back onto the couch. Flushing bright red, he loosened his collar. He awkwardly shifted, the couch creaking under his weight, while Mr. Spicebag generously offered his handkerchief, and George's dad generously wiped the sweat from his brow. Well, I suppose George could work for me part-time to pay it off, suggested Mr. Spicebag, as he inspected a chocolate digestive. Yes, of course, agreed a relieved George's dad. Absolutely wonderful idea. George shall work for you every day after school, and every Saturday and Sunday, for a year. What? Cried George. He had not forgotten Barnaby's warning. Quiet. Splendid, replied Mr. Spicebag, finishing off the biscuit and picking up his coat. Well, I must be off. See you tomorrow after school, George. Oh, and I almost forgot. Mr. Spicebag pulled out a large brown paper bag and left it on the table. Some Spicebags on the house. Don't get up, I'll see myself out. George's parents greedily snatched the food up, ignoring Mr. Spicebag's departure.